Hello, and welcome to our sixth lecture on the Gold Rush unit. We've got two more to go. Very exciting. This one is on discrimination. Here are your notes. Please pause the video just like before. Write down what you think fits best into each spot. And if you don't get one, no problem. We'll talk about it in class. If you have a question or comment, please bring it to the discussion forum or to our circle when we meet, just like always. Pause the video when you're ready. Discrimination. For those of you who never heard the word discrimination or have a vague kind of understanding of what the word means, discrimination is when a person or a group of people are treated differently, mostly worse, because of their membership or affiliation to a particular group. And what I mean by that affiliation, I mean like they're belonging to a particular group or just being themselves. Like if you happen to have brown eyes, you are affiliated with people who have, you're in that affiliation of all people with brown eyes. So some of it was a choice and some of it was just that is who you were. Now these people were discriminated against. Discriminated. They were discriminated against in a bad way. For example, staying with eyes, all people with green eyes can't play foursquare at recess. Imagine that. Imagine if there was a rule at our school that said anyone who has green eyes is not allowed to play foursquare. Even if you're really good at it, even if you love it, too bad, you're not allowed to play foursquare at recess if you have green eyes. Not very fair, right? Well, that was kind of the thing that was happening during the gold rush. We'll talk about that, but I wanted to talk first about just what discrimination means. And there were different factors that people were discriminated against for. The first one is ethnicity. Ethnicity is your genetic makeup, where your parents are from. Are you African American? Are you Asian American? Are you Native American? Or are you European American? Are you an American American? Are you South American? Your color of the color of your skin, the origin of where your original people or ancestors came from. That was the first one and most obvious. Another was religion. So if you were a different religion than one group or the other group, they may say, we don't like this religion, get out of here, you're not welcome. Gender is boy or girl. So sometimes if, for example, there's a lot of gender discrimination that happened throughout history, and only recently are women considered more as an equal in a lot of ways in terms of pay or jobs or stuff like that. And in some cases, still not even that case where women are being discriminated against. Age is another discrimination. Some of you have felt discriminated against because some people may say, oh, you're too young to do that. Maybe mom and dad, oh, you're too young to do that. But you feel like, hey, I can't do that. You're discriminating against me because I'm young. Well, that's one way. There's another one is for the opposite of that. If you're too old, they're like, oh, you're too old. You can't do that. You can't drive a car. Get out of here. You're old. So just some people get discriminated against because they're too old, some for being too young. Another one is a disability. Like, let's say your legs don't work, so you're in a wheelchair, or maybe you have lost a leg, or maybe you lost a hand, or maybe you have a speech disability. And there's lots of different disabilities out there, and people were discriminated or are discriminated against because of them. Another one that sticks out is pregnancy. So if a woman is about to have a baby, a mom is about to have a baby, some people get discriminated against for that. For example, you're trying to get a job. They're like, well, you seem smart and you seem nice and cool, but you're pregnant, and we don't want to have to pay for you to sit at home to be with the baby during those 3 months that we're by law supposed to give to you. So no, we don't want to hire you. So there's lots of ways people get discriminated against, but ultimately discrimination is a very, very bad thing, and it's taken humans a very, very long time to kind of understand, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe it's not good to be mean to people who are a little bit different than us. So we're progressively getting better as a human species, but we still have a ways to go. But, of course, during this time, discrimination was definitely a part of the gold rush culture, the gold rush life, and the gold rush people. And the people who were discriminated against were sometimes harshly done so. But discrimination was a little less at first in 1848. The reason for that is because these people really didn't. I mean, the miners kind of go to the gold mines. There's a lot of space. There's not that many people there. So you're like, you're over there. I'm over here. That's fine. Oh, you're a Native American. Yeah, go ahead and help yourself. There's tons of gold for me. Oh, you're a Mexican. No problem. Go enjoy yourself. But that kind of changed after a little while, because in 1849, after everyone felt so successful, now there isn't just a few people. There's thousands and thousands of people, and the questions come up. Well, should these people who aren't from America be here? Should these people who don't look like me be here? Do they deserve gold more than I do? Or sometimes it was just like, I don't like the way that guy looks, so get out of here. And that's kind of what happened. Now, if you remember from our previous lecture, California itself was part of Mexico. And it was part of Mexico for a really long time. And it was only, in 1847 that the Mexican-American War happened. And technically in 1849, California wasn't even a recognized state by the United States. It was still kind of just like this area that the United States kind of owned, but they recently bought it from Mexico. But it wasn't like they had newspaper, like online newspapers you could read on your cell phone, and people knew what was going on right away. Some people didn't even really know. They're like, oh, is this Mexico still? Or Yerba Buena? They're not really sure. So these Mexican nationals who lived in California their entire lives have these kind of random people just show up and be like, hey, well, America just bought this place, and get out of here. It's our place now. So, of course, if you live there your whole life, you're like, no way, I'm not leaving. This is my place. Can you imagine that today? Someone coming into the classroom and just kicking you out. Imagine just, a bunch of, I don't know, Nicaraguans coming up here and saying, hey, get out of here. This is our classroom now. We just bought it. You have to leave. You'd be like, no way. I grew up here. This is my place. And like we said before, when we learned about the camp life, people were just frustrated with not succeeding, not getting those thousands and millions of dollars they were promised in the newspapers, and just struggling to stay alive. So they took it out on, people who didn't look like them, the people who were in the minority. And ultimately, people during this time were very racist. And racist means you just don't like people who aren't like you. So I think that's kind of a natural human tendency. But we learn in a society that, hey, this is bad, because all people are, pretty much the same. So it's not nice. You don't like when people are mean to you just because you have brown hair or brown skin. That's not nice. So how are people discriminated against in the gold rush? Number one, like I talked about, get out of here. You can't mine. It's our place. Number two, unfair trials which led to lynchings. So sometimes they might say, this guy over here, he stole my shovel and he stole my claim. Yeah, get him. And sometimes it would have been, someone they didn't like. Sometimes it was just like a Mexican guy. Sometimes it was a Chinese or just someone who's different. And they would get this mob of people to just kind of chase them, and they would attack them. And people just shout things out, and they'd kind of run on it. And it was very, very dangerous. And ultimately, a lot of people who were, in the minority were robbed. They just got things stolen from them, whether it was their claim, the gold. Imagine working for 3 months, every single day, making all this money in gold, and then someone just steals it from you, or beats you and steals it, or you just get attacked, or just generally just pushed out by gunpoint. Hey, get out of here, we'll kill you. Especially when you knew it was like a great claim and you finally got it. I mean, that would be really disappointing, because everyone who came to California left something behind. So everyone wanted to make it rich, and it doesn't matter if you're from New England or if you're from Chile. I mean, you left your family behind. You paid money to come here. You all want to get rich. And so it doesn't matter what color your skin is, you're still going to be disappointed, and it's still going to hurt your feelings. And it just kept escalating. I mean, the more people who came, the more people who were unsuccessful. They started like attacking those foreign people who were successful, whether they were mining. Um, Even if they started a business and that business was doing well. For example, some Chinese, they were attacked and not allowed to mine, so they started a laundry and they were discriminated against because, hey, you're Chinese, you're not allowed to wash our clothes, and your business is making too much money. I'm mad because I didn't make them gold. I'll kill you. In the worst case scenario, some people were actually flat out just exterminated, like paid by the government to be killed. And we'll talk about that. It's really, really sad, but it's true. And that's, hopefully we learn history in class so these kinds of things never happen again. And so that's why do we learn about something that happened 200 years ago? Well, because we don't want it to happen again. And actually, this wasn't even 200 years ago. It was like 160 years ago or something like that. There was these groups called the Hounds, and the Hounds were just these band of frustrated men, white men, who would go around and then attack people. Hey, these Chileans are in our spot. Get them out of here. They shouldn't be here. Go back to Chile. And they'd go around and they'd just basically be the muscle and force people out. But I mean, at the same time, you have to think, I mean, if you own this land now, should people from other countries be there taking stuff away? For example, let's say in Japan today they find a bunch of gold, and they're like, hey, there's tons of gold here. Can you imagine if just like thousands and thousands of people just showed up in Japan and just started like digging in people's yards looking for gold? Wouldn't those Japanese people have a right to kind of just say, hey, get out of here, you're not Japanese, you didn't pay for any of this land? So that was kind of like the thinking of some of these Americans. Like, why are these people coming from all over the world? Get out of here, this is our place. But then again, the Mexicans lived there their whole life, so like, hey, you guys just got here, what do you mean? We've lived here our whole life. You can see where that goes. But each group of people kind of dealt with this discrimination differently. The Chinese dealt with this discrimination surprisingly well, I guess you could say, because they were non-violent. When they would get discriminated against, they would just kind of quietly go away. And they would just think, okay, well, I'm not allowed to do that, so what can I do to survive? And they just think of something else. And these Chinese were coming in huge numbers, especially like in the early 1950s. 20,000 or so came that year, I think. And by 1952, 1 of every 4 miners were Chinese. So there was a lot of them. And the Chinese thought of the idea of coming to America and to California. They thought of California. They actually had a name for it. They called it Gomsam, or Gold Mountain. They just thought this place was the land of opportunity. And I've said it before in earlier lectures, and we talked about it in discussion about how these Chinese people, had a really tough life. And so in their culture, they didn't have any options. And so they came here and they had this opportunity. Well, yeah, we're not allowed to mine, but maybe we'll figure something else out. So they're very determined, and they also didn't want to cause trouble. That wasn't in their culture. They don't want to cause trouble. So to survive, like I said, they started new businesses, and they came up with other ways to make money, opening stores or doing other services. But even when they did that, they started making money. The native white people got mad, and they attacked them. So pretty sad, but they were resilient, and they dealt with it very quietly and kind of passively. So yeah, submissive is a good word to use there. Here's some other ways that the Chinese were discriminated against. In local newspapers, they would actually draw pictures that were very racist, very discriminatory, of how to deal with Chinese, or why they would say Chinese people are bad. And I'm not going to go too much into this because I just think it's bad. It's not something to celebrate here. But I want to show you that, hey, this was kind of happening, and this it was not good. They really were as ruthless and mean as they possibly could be, um, to try to make people to spread this kind of hate. So it's just bad. And you hopefully you'll never see that in newspapers in your lifetime, because if people do print anything like that in newspapers, they're in real big trouble. The next group of people I want to talk about are the Mexicans. Now, the Mexicans were originally Californians. They were actually a lot of the local people who lived there, but also the Mexicans who came up from Southern California or Baja California or other parts of Mexico. They came up, and remember, Mexico owned this land for their entire lifetimes. It was only till this recent, past couple months that technically America or United States was purchased California, so they thought of it as their homeland. And they didn't deal with it like the Chinese. They felt like they had every right to mine the gold and be part of the experience. And if anything, these white people shouldn't be there because, hey, it's their land. They grew up there. Mexico owned it for so long. And some Mexicans, when they were forced to leave, they would say, you know what, I just don't want to deal with the trouble. I'll go. Okay, I tried, and they'd go home. But other ones were like, no, do something about it. And when they did, they would fight. They'd fight back, and it would lead to bloodshed. It would lead to bad things, violent things. And some of them, to get revenge, became bandits or robbers. They're like, well, if we're not allowed to mine because we'll get lynch mobbed by the big crowd, we'll just wait till people are unsuspectingly off their guard, and we'll steal their gold. The white people will mine all the gold, and we'll just wait till they're walking to the bank and then steal it from them. So that was another thing that kind of was happening during this time in this Wild West. And the most infamous of these bandits was a man named Joaquin Murrieta. And Joaquin Murrieta, some say, was a fantasy or a fictional character because he just kind of became the scapegoat. Like anytime anyone got robbed, they say, oh, Joaquin Murrieta did it to me. And he became so famous, they started putting a reward for whoever could find him. But I mean, some of it was just preposterous because it'd be like, there'd be a robbery on the road from LA to San Francisco, and that same day there'd be a robbery, in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. So obviously he couldn't have been in both places at the same time, but he would get blamed for both crimes. And eventually they did, here's an artist's rendition of the time. Like they drew this picture, they printed it out. They're like, all right, here's what he looks like. If you see this man, capture him or kill him. And eventually they did kill someone who either was claiming to be Joaquin or they just said, hey, this is Joaquin. And they killed him and put his head in a jar and showed it showed it to people, which is pretty gross. But there was actually a kind of a cool book written about Joaquin. It's called Bandit's Moon. And for some of you, we're actually reading that right now. So if you aren't reading this right now, pick it up or ask someone about it in class because it's a very cool book. And it's about kind of this bandit, Joaquin, and how he plays this role. Finally, we come to the Native Americans in the Gold Rush, and this one is probably, these people were dealt with the worst. Sadly, during this time, many 49ers just overran these lands that the Native American Indians used for hunting grounds. I mean, that's how they lived for thousands and thousands of years was, hunting deer and collecting acorns and doing those kinds of things. And now you have all these miners coming and they're like scaring away all the game or cutting down all the trees or just shooting at you, forcing you to get off. And so it was really sad because the Native American Indians weren't even considered even human. I mean, some of them were brought into the missions and converted into Christianity, and they worked as miners. Of course, they were discriminated against, and they didn't make as much money, or they weren't allowed to mine at all. But the ones who stayed in the tribes and were out in the out in the kind of wilderness a little bit, they were the ones who were actually really, really persecuted against and discriminated against. And it got so bad that the American government was actually rewarding, or the California government rather, was actually rewarding people with gold for either driving Native Americans off the land, like forcing them to leave, or for even killing them. Like for every Native American you kill, you bring back their scalp, we're going to give you some gold. And so you had these families, just mom and dad and brother and sister, just living their life in their little camp, enjoying themselves, and then here comes these crazy people killing them so they can get gold. So it was really, really bad and sad. And obviously, if someone starts attacking your family, you're gonna fight back. But the problem was they had primitive weapons. They had bows and arrows, and the Americans had guns and pistols. So it was really tough for them. And ultimately, they were all pretty much forced out. So that's the worst kind of discrimination, is when you just not even saying, okay, you can't work here, or you can't make as much money, or you can't wash our clothes. If you just straight out just exterminate someone, that's pretty much the worst you can get. And that's sadly what happened to these people. And a lot of it, if not most of it, was just unjust. They didn't deserve it, basically. So here you can see a picture of some Native Americans with their bow and arrows trying to fight the 49ers. And yeah, that was just a drawing, and it wasn't drawn by Native Americans. So it's coming from one side, not the other. But this kind of discrimination continued on throughout the history of California up until recent times. And I'm going to talk about one particular brave descendant of these gold miners who kind of made a big difference. On the bottom right, you can see this picture of this Chinese worker, and he's holding a washboard, and you can see they're like, oh, the Chinese must go, and they're finding a way to get rid of the Chinese because they're successfully making money washing clothes. The first thing they did was any miner who was Chinese, they would charge them $20 a month, and it was kind of like this foreign miners tax. And the Chinese actually paid it. The Mexicans didn't pay it as much. Native Americans really didn't make enough money, or didn't pay it as much. Some of the Europeans just kind of blended in. The Chinese, again, they were trying to avoid confrontation. They paid it, and they actually collected a lot of money that way. California government did, but eventually, later years after the gold rush kind of slowed down and the Chinese people stayed, they started this thing called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prevented Chinese people actually even from coming to the States. I mean, now it's hard for anyone to come to the States because there's so many people here, but before it wasn't like that. Anyone could pretty much come if you bought a ticket. And now, at least during that time, they try to exclude Chinese people because they were successful and because they were racist. But one particular man, his name was Yikwol, he actually was a successful business owner. He started a wash during the gold rush, and it continued on for some time, and a long time actually. And the people in San Francisco were jealous of this, and so what they did was they tried to create a law that said Chinese people can't wash clothes. Now, they can't flat out say Chinese people can't wash clothes, but what they can do is they can say you're not allowed to wash clothes in a building unless it's made of brick. Why would that law affect Chinese people? Well, the reason is Chinese people couldn't afford to rent buildings that were made out of brick. They could only rent buildings that were made out of wood. So, because that was cheaper. And Mr. Woe actually fought it. He said, you know what, this isn't American. California is part of America now. There's laws and regulations in America, and I think this is unconstitutional to say that people can't wash clothes in a wooden building, because I think it's intentionally trying to be discriminatory towards Chinese people, which it was. And so he fought it, and in 1886, he won. His law won, and it was a big success for Chinese people and for all people. in America, and eventually these kind of laws led to greater things in social equality. But unfortunately, there were other lynch mob, like we talked about, laws that were played out during the gold rush. So this is before California became a state, or even right when it was first starting to become a state. Before there was like this, the American government could really hone in on what was going on during this wild time. Um, Sometimes Chinese people would just get blamed for stuff like, hey, he stole this or he did that, and it really didn't happen, and it was just stemmed from jealousy or whatnot. So ultimately, it was sad what was happening, and we can look back on it now and say, wow, that's really wrong, that's really bad. But at the time, the people actually were like, yeah, this is normal, that's how it should be. So humans have kind of came a long way, and again, we're showing this so you hopefully this doesn't happen in the future. We learn from our mistakes, and hopefully history doesn't repeat itself. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening. You can finish up if you forgot anything or you have a question, write it down. If you need to go back, please do, and bring these into class when we meet next time. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.